This is not a public meeting, but a meeting the public can attend. I'm Austin White, Chair of the Audit Committee, and would like to welcome everyone present to the Audit Committee meeting today. Before we commence, I would like to outline the domestic arrangements for the meeting. We are not expecting a fire practice today. If the alarm sounds, please leave the chamber, turn right, and proceed down the stairway and through the emergency exit on the ground floor. The assembly point is in the public square in front of CAS beyond the fountain. Anybody with mobility issues should wait in the refuge area near the lift and use the intercom to call for assistance. The meeting will be recorded and published on the Council's website. By entering the Council chamber, you are accepting that you will be recorded and your images will be retained and broadcast by the Council. If anyone intends to record today's meeting, please ensure that this does not disturb the conduct of the meeting. Please ensure that your mobile phones are switched to silent mode, or off if you prefer. Thank you. I will now commence the meeting. Item 1, apologies for absence. We have apologies for Dr. Stuart Green this morning. He can't attend, it's through illness. I'll move, no one else, no apologies. Item 2, exclusions of the public and press. There are no items on the agenda where the public and press are to be excluded. Is that agreed? Agreed. Yeah. Thank you. Item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest, please? No. So if you do spot something later on, well, there's a declaration form to complete, but I'm not expecting that. Item 4. Minutes of the Audit Committee meeting held on the 23rd of November 2023. Can these minutes be moved to a true and accurate record, please, colleague? Thank you. And seconded? Seconded. And all agreed. Thank you very much. Item 5, Audit Committee Action Log. All members have read the report, so I'll ask Peter Jackson, Head of Internal Audit, if he wishes to bring any specific issues to members' attention or has anything to add since the report was drafted. Peter?
All issues are marked as completed, Chair, so nothing to add.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, no questions from me. As you say, all items are marked as complete. Anyone else, anything? No, we shall move on then. Just bear with me. Sorry, I'm nearly forgetting. So I'll read out the recommendations within the report. The committee is asked to note the progress being made against the actions agreed at the previous committee meeting. Is that moved and seconded? Yes, sir. Thank you, and all agreed. The recommendation is noted. Item 6, an update on the Hackney Carriage private hire licensing service review rapid improvement project. Again, all members will have read the report, so I'll ask Kelly Hopkins, Assistant Director Environment, and Claire Bignell, Head of Service Regulation and Enforcement, if they wish to bring any specific issues to the attention of members or anything to add to the report since it was drafted. Kelly?
Thanks, Chair. I'll just give you some headlines. Members will have read the report and will note the extensive work that's been undertaken in the service since the audit of the Hackney Carriage and private hire licensing element of the licensing service last June. As members will understand, licensing by its nature is undertaken because certain activities are deemed to be a high-risk activity, a high-risk industry, and that is why the council regulates and acts as regulator to the local industry in Doncaster to ensure that drivers and vehicles are safe and that the safety of the travelling public in Doncaster isn't compromised. The outcome of the audit, which again we were very grateful to Peter and team for assisting us with the audit, resulted in 12 audit recommendations. 7 of those to date have been completed, 5 outstanding, which again members will note are detailed in the report. All of the outstanding audit recommendations are lower priority improvements. What I would say is that I'm very pleased with progress that has been made. We've worked closely with colleagues in PIC to develop a rapid improvement plan, which has taken this work forward. We have reviewed a number of our administrative functions, and we've also examined some key areas of policy and compliance to make sure that we are compliant with our own licensing policies and the national guidance for taxi, hackney and private hire. The key issues I would leave members with is that I think all of the 12 audit recommendations, I think, have been linked to some key failures within the service, and that is that our IT systems have not been fit for purpose, and that capacity within the team has been significantly overstretched within recent years. So I think they've been the two main causation factors for the weaknesses that the audit uncovered in the service. So I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Kelly. Yes, I think fundamentally it's a good news story, is the report. And we appreciate the service is undergoing a significant transformation and improvement because of the audit work undertaken. I have a couple of questions, but I'll throw it open to colleagues first.
I don't want to blight the report in any way, shape or form. However, what does concern me, and if my memory is disappearing fast, I'm sure you'll tell me, but I thought that the whole of council, some years ago, and I've been on the authority now nearly 10 years, that there was a review of the IT systems throughout all departments, and it appears to me that licensing are being overlooked. If we're at the stage that we're at now with the IT system, to me, it tells me that it was overlooked somehow.
If I can come in on that point, I think the difficulty we have is that in local authorities, we have a whole range of complex services and needs that each of those individual services required. Unfortunately, we can't get bespoke packages for each individual service. So we've bought a package that has provided facilities for the whole of regulatory services and beyond. I think there are other teams within the council that also use it. And I think the system that we did purchase, which is M3, I think just had a number of limitations. Because taxi licensing is such an important area of our council business, any weaknesses in that system, I suppose, are more of a priority, more of a profile than in some other areas. What I can say is that despite the failures of the system, there have been a number of workarounds, manual workarounds that have been put in place. So despite the fact that there are weaknesses in the IT system, the actual work and integrity of what licensing do hasn't been compromised. However, what it does do is just, again, drains capacity from the team because for example, to give we can't run certain reports. They have to be manually extracted from over 1,000 records. So in fact, we have 900 drivers. I think we've got probably around 700 vehicles. So you're looking at significant numbers of records that people have to do manual trawls through. So that, again, that has impacted in capacity. And I think, being realistic, it's probably impacted on the reputation of the team, frustration from the local trade in terms of, speed of processing, and accessibility to the team. But what I can say is that, we're absolutely pointing in the right direction now. We've actually just completed a procurement process for a new IT system, so those tenders are being evaluated, and fingers crossed we'll have a new system in place soon, which is going to be a better fit for the service.
Yeah, thanks very much. I've just got a couple of questions about, and I'll give you all the questions now. You can answer them in whatever order you want. So, but first of all, just regarding the IT system M3, I'd like to know when it was purchased and what our requirements were when we purchased it. Did it not meet our requirements? And if it didn't meet the requirements, are we not going to hold the vendor to account? And also, given the fact that it sounds like we made a mistake when we purchased M3, if we're now transitioning to a new system, how are we going to make sure that we've now got the requirements right and it's actually going to deliver what we actually want for the service?
Okay, thanks. I'm not an expert on M3 and I wasn't with the council when it was purchased. I know, Claire, you've got a long history with M3.
Thank you, yeah. So we inherited M3. Well, I joined Doncaster sort of back in 2016, so it was a system that was already in place. I understand that we've had it for a good 25 years. There are only 4 different sort of software suppliers actually for a regulation and enforcement sort of field. We've kind of upgraded as time's moved on. We've upgraded with the M3 package as part and parcel of all the upgrades. At times, when it came to sort of re-tendering process, we'd obviously look at what was out there again in the market, and at the time it's looking at the best value, and at those particular moments M3 always sort of stood in a good account as being the sort of system to continue with. As you know, technology moves on quite quick, doesn't it? So that's kind of where we are now in terms of kind of seeing what's out there in the market. M3 is no longer going to be providing a service. They've sort of developed their own packages and moved to an assured system. So their own sort of packages has developed in line with others. So the recent sort of procurement process has taken into account them current suppliers, how the technology's moved on, how their packages sort of stand in terms of reporting mechanisms, in terms of being able to do monitoring performance, etc. So we're currently, as I said, just done the evaluation. We're looking at the bidders that's there and just doing the comparisons to finalise.
Thanks very much, Claire. So just on the back of that, I'm in 25 years is a very long time. In IT terms, I think that makes it prehistoric. Very rare do I hear these days that somebody's had a system for a quarter of a century. So that does worry me a little bit, in the fact that in IT circumstances, we normally have a procedure where we evergreen technology. We keep an eye of what's happening, what's on the horizon. We make sure that it doesn't fall into a position where it's out of support or out of service. This is clearly out of support and out of service, and no amount of upgrades would have got us there without moving to a completely new version of M3 with the latest technology. So I find it a little bit scary that it's on 25 years. So I don't know who this question is to. It might even be to Debbie. But do we have a procedure to recognise systems that need evergreening and upgrading? And if we do, how did this one fall out of the list, if that's the case?
I suggest Claire comes back, because I've got a sense that they have done what you've said, but I think Claire needs to furnish further details.
Yeah, it's a small market in terms of who provides the supplied service for regulation enforcement. So there isn't 100 suppliers out there for this particular market, and we've upgraded the systems along the process. So when contracts have come up, that's when we obviously, with procurement, we would do the exercises, work out who's out there on the market and do relevant upgrades or look to sort of move on. It's always been that the relevant upgrades and moving on to the next sort of version of M3 has always taken place.
Yeah, just to emphasise that point. Beg your pardon. It's not unusual in local government, particularly in niche areas. As Claire said, regulation and enforcement, it's a niche area. There's probably only about, it's linked to local authorities. There's only around 450 of us nationally. So it's not a big part of the IT market. So what these IT providers tend to do is rebrand, upgrade, buy in other companies. So there will have been, regular upgrades throughout that 25-year period, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to do, undertake our kind of service functions. But yeah, it's a complicated area of business, and IT, bespoke IT, is just really difficult, for us to get for our particular regulatory functions. It's a one size fits all package.
And just to come back on that, sorry, Kelly. You're making me cough now. Just to come back on that, at what point did it not start meeting our requirements?
I think that we've always had manual workarounds in place, and I think that, again, that impacts on efficiency of the team. However, I think the audit report, I've been here 2.5 years, so the audit report was done last year, kind of 18 months into my role here, so I can't really comment on what happened before. But I know, that, again, we've limped along using a system that hasn't been fit for purpose, but we're now, we're looking to get a much better product, and that will, assist greatly with efficiency within the team.
didn't know whether it would be just helpful for the audit committee to kind of understand in terms of technology. We have a technology governance board, and what that does is kind of look at that. So we have a list of when all the contracts were due to expire, and make sure that we kind of have that conversation. It's a cross-representation across the council, so it's got representatives from each directorate. So from a place perspective, Scott Cardwell sits on the TGB, so that's make sure that that we are following that plan, that we are kind of looking at. I think we've also got a 5-year plan coming that we're producing as well. So over the next 5 years, we're kind of really clear in terms of the timescales and plotting to make sure. So it's also from a resources perspective that we've got the resources available, to deliver the implementations. And as we know, it's not always sometimes a system, but it's how it's been implemented, and it's about the data. So I think there's some of the things that we'll definitely be looking at from a next implementation perspective. So just to kind of also...
Wasn't that fair? Yes, Dave.
So just following on from Councillor Bluff's questions around M3, I just wonder how the complexities of licensing that have come through in that 25 years, in particular, possibly in the last 10 years, how those new complexities and requirements and legislative changes has impacted on the ability of the M3 system to be upgraded sufficiently to be able to support the licensing department in its role. I just wonder if you've got any feel for whether that's fed into some of the difficulties. I know that there's a relatively regular flow of changes to what's required. I just wonder, has that impacted to some extent, do you think, or not?
Necessarily applying for a taxi licence is a really detailed process. We need quite intrusive information about people. We need DBS certificates. We need medical information to make sure that they're fit and healthy to drive a taxi. We need to know about immigration status. We need to know about a whole host of intrusive pieces of information. So, the system needs to be able to capture quite a diverse amount of information. So I think, again, this is why getting a bespoke package is quite difficult. So definitely, over the last 15 years, there's been a much greater emphasis on safeguarding within the taxi industry and making sure that individual drivers are fit and proper and don't pose a risk to the public. Obviously, there's been some high profile, quite serious criminal activity in relation to the taxi industry, and we need to make sure that people are safe. So absolutely, we're gathering more and more information about taxi drivers to make sure that they are fit and proper.
Yeah, nicely following on from that. You say in your report there's been an increase since April last year in licences, and you believe it to be associated with the cost of living crisis and for additional work for income. How is that monitored through the Working Time Directive? Because if they're working full time, then we don't want them to go out in the vehicle. Can they obtain appropriate insurance for that? Can they buy? Because I know in the driving field, having second income and you're driving, on the public roads and dealing with the public, it's difficult to attain.
Councillor Shaw might clarify on this one. I don't think the Working Time Directive applies to self-employed individuals. I think it's only those that are employed.
I think so, and I think, and I may be wrong on this, that it only counts for each employer.
It does.
So you could work 100 hours for one employer and then in theory go and work this. I obviously can't, but in theory do the same for another employer.
And just to clarify,
it's more in place to protect employees from being exploited and forced to work more hours for an employer. So it's a useful point, but not. I don't think it's covered in any way by that legislation.
Yeah, I totally get that. If you're self-employed, but if these drivers are employed by another employee, employer, how do they obtain insurance? Because I know from personal experience, being in the transport industry, employing people who are employed and then come to be a driver, you know, part-time, getting the right insurance policy, you know, cover is very difficult and very expensive.
So all of our taxi drivers are self-employed. Some of those private hire choose to work and get their contracts through an operator, as you'll know, and then other individuals with Hackney licences are allowed to rank up and apply for hire in the street so they can be flagged down. So all of those individuals operate on a self-employed basis. We wouldn't be able to determine how long those individuals were working. And I think, again, from my experience of the industry, you know, some drivers will be full-time taxi drivers, that's their main occupation, but probably the majority will do it as an additional sideline to other employment. But again, we wouldn't be able to determine how many jobs or how many hours those individuals are working separately.
Okay, thank you. I've got a couple of questions myself, if I may. IT, I've got it down at the bottom of my list, but it seems to be up at the top of a number of people. I noticed that the new information management system was being procured and implemented. And I think you mentioned this in your introduction, Kelly. My question was, and just to say I've heard you right, I was concerned if this system would improve other aspects of your service where licences are required, not just taxi services, taxi licensing. And if the answer is yes, will there be opportunities to extend this system into other directorates and services and not just place?
I think there's significant progress being made corporately with the new emphasis on customer interaction. I mean, Debbie's better placed than me to speak about this, but again, modernising how we interact with customers and people that transact with us. So we are really keen on using things like chatbots, artificial intelligence, because what we find is we get very, very similar inquiries coming through that people, or drivers in particular, could just simply find that information out online. Now, we know that there's a preference within the industry to kind of communicate by phone and digitally, because they can do the paperwork while they're ranked up or, waiting for a job. And so our ability to be able to provide information to them quickly and the sorts of information they need is a big piece of work that we're doing as part of the Rapid Improvement Plan. So yeah, I think all of this new digital technology is really, really important. I think because the audit and Peter and team uncovered, I suppose, some key service improvements, we've been lucky in licensing because kind of we're at the front of the queue in terms of being able to utilise and introduce this new technology. So yeah, absolutely, I'm sure if it works for us, it can be rolled out to other parts of the council. Debbie, I'm talking about your area, apologies, but...
That's good to know, because we're making a sizable investment in the new system. If other directorate services can use it, that's a plus, isn't it?
Just add on, Chair, that certainly within regulation enforcement, the new packages that we're looking at certainly show a big difference to kind of like the housing sort of standards, looking at sort of planning sort of enforcement work, etc. So it really does spread quite nicely across the regulation enforcement sort of sectors.
Good, thank you. Now, if I've read the report correctly, I understand there's several processes that have been streamlined. So can you inform the committee whether the controls have been reduced as a result of that streamlining? And if there have been any reductions, and have there been any reductions regarding medical checks and insurance checks on the taxi drivers? I know you touched on that earlier, and I've got a supplementary question to that, depending on what you...
No, there's been no reduction in terms of what we expect, certainly not around medical certification and fitness to drive. What I would say is we are looking at a separate piece of policy work around how we currently recheck insurance documentation for the trade. So we were fortunate enough to bring in an expert in licensing to work for us for a period of about 12 weeks. And she had extensive knowledge of best practice from other authorities and has kind of gone through our policies and our processes and thumbed some of the things that stand out. So as you know, we've got a really small team and we need to be as efficient as possible. What we do in Doncaster, which is I think fairly unique within the licensing industry within local councils, is that we do an interim check on drivers' insurance documentation. Now, Claire made the point to me, which I'm going to pinch. If we ask for evidence that your vehicle insurance is valid, it's only valid on that day. You can go away and cancel it. So it's a bit of a, I would say, number one, it's a bit of a pointless exercise which uses up resources that we can better focus elsewhere to make our services better. But I think secondly as well, there is an opportunity for us to move this responsibility onto the operators. The vast majority of drivers in Doncaster work through an operator, and what we would look to do is to do spot checks and samples with the operators to say, right, we want to see 25 of your drivers and we want to see evidence that their vehicle's licensed. The other thing I would say as well is none of us can drive a vehicle without it being insured. So those individual drivers, if they are driving without insurance, they're breaking the law. So it's a legal matter rather than a matter for the council to regulate. Other than take their licence away, it would be something that the police would prosecute for. And again, just to kind of give you a bit more assurance, when we do operations with SYP, they can check the DVLA system to see that individual taxi drivers have a valid licence when they run the plate check. We feel that that's a better enforcement tool and approach than us having someone kind of randomly, checking drivers' insurance documentations, as we say, which could be invalidated the next day, next week, next month. But again, it's a piece of policy work that we'll be bringing to committee to look at and determine through Councillor Shaw.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Yeah, I think the insurance is a very important aspect because like we all have the opportunity when we insure our cars to do it in one payment or over 12 months or 10 months. But you may just stop paying it, which then effectively you're not insured. But does that stop you driving? If you're responsible, yes it does, but there are irresponsible drivers, and I hate to say it, but there's probably some irresponsible taxi drivers as well. And same with the medical, my concerns were it's like an MOT, isn't it? You're only fit on the day. I think you used that terminology earlier, so a few weeks later, months later, you may not be fit to drive, but I was just concerned how we find that out. But if you're doing those spot checks periodically, I don't know if there's much more you can do other than that, or rely on the drivers being responsible citizens. Right. I guess I can guess what the answers are on some of these, but are you confident that our current arrangements are safe? How do they compare with surrounding local authorities? How do they compare nationally? And do we comply with all current regulations and best practice guidance?
Thankfully, the audit gave us, I think it was partial assurance as it stood. So I think we've got that independent assessment of the service. So I think, yes, we can say that we are. I think something that was brought to light by the audit is that we've now tightened up our DBS process. So now all drivers are on the national update an update service. So we will be notified by the company that undertakes this work for us. I think it's within, is it a weekly check or is it 2 weekly checks? So every 2 weeks now we have a check of those DBSs, where previously, again, if a driver applied for either a new application or renewal and had a clean DBS, again, he could have gone out and committed crime within the next month and we wouldn't have known. Well, potentially there's a risk we wouldn't have known until the next renewal date. I mean, drivers do sometimes fail to declare things like points on the licence, or I would say low level kind of criminal interactions. The licence means that any interaction with the police really needs to be declarable around any criminality. So I think you can never say never, because if you take the case of John Warboys, who was the serial rapist in London, he will have been presenting with a clean DBS year on year on year. So we can never say never. However, I think our current safeguarding systems compare well. We follow the national guidance, and I think what I would say as well, the DBS system, that putting drivers on the renewal system was part of the National Good Practice Guidance that came out a few years ago. but there was no time scale set for that. So what the majority of licensing authorities are doing is moving drivers onto the update system at renewal, whereas we absolutely went root and branch at it, threw a whole load of effort at it last year, and now every single one of our 900 drivers, give or take a handful, are on that system. The handful, I would just add, chose not to be on the DBS system, and we ask them for a clean new DBS every 6 months, which they have to pay for. So nobody's escaping the process. We're having far more frequent checks than we had this time last year, which is great news.
That is good news, thank you. Now, I think most of us, I'm sure all of us, are aware of Wolverhampton City Council and how they have been licensing taxi drivers, both in Doncaster and nationally. Could you explain briefly to us how that's possible? And then I'm going to ask, are their checks, Wolverhampton's checks and controls, sufficient for us with our new system and our audit introducing safeguards, to know that their licensed taxi drivers are as well checked as those licensed now by the City of Doncaster Council?
So within the taxi industry, there is a huge amount of interest in terms of the activities of Wolverhampton over the last 7 or 8 years. They have gone from having a small licensing unit in the same way that we do in 2016, where I think they employed 7 staff, to a situation where they license over 38,000 drivers now. They have a staff team of 120. To highlight how that compares with us, we have 6.5 FTE in Doncaster. I think it's an interesting one, Wolverhampton. There's been national political debate about this at the local level, but I'm also aware at national level in terms of the implications of the deregulation that took place, I think it was 2015. Again, there were unintended consequences of that, and now Wolverhampton, don't quote me, but this is a estimate. They are responsible for licensing about 1 in 5 taxis nationally now. Over a third of the taxis in Greater Manchester are licensed by Wolverhampton, and I think there's about I think that's around 8,000. So it's a huge number of vehicles. In terms of their checks, I think Wolverhampton, like us, they are on the DBS update service. They have IT systems in place, digital application processes, which allow people to apply much quicker, much more easily than us. They've been able to invest massively because of the reserves that they've been able to develop because of licensing so many people. They've been able to reduce their fees. So I think that the last fee I saw is that for a driver license, it's around £47 for a year. By comparison, I think we were around, I can check, 187. So, we simply can't compete with them. So they are becoming the licensing authority of choice for a lot of drivers. What I would say is that in Doncaster, it's probably only around 10% of drivers opt to be licensed with Wolverhampton, which says a lot for us. And I think, again, it's not just the political concerns around I suppose out-of-town licensing, if you like. I think local people as well like to know that they are, that the taxi that they're using is licensed locally. Because I think in terms of, if things go wrong, I suppose being very blunt about it, if things go wrong in Doncaster in the licensing service, the public in Doncaster have somebody to hold to account. If something goes wrong with a Wolverhampton taxi driver, who do local people hold to account? Elected members in Wolverhampton. I think there's, I'm probably making I hope it's not a political point, but I think, there are issues about responsibility, transparency, and I think the current arrangements compromise that. So, I mean, there's nothing we can do about it at this point in time. Wolverhampton are doing nothing illegal. And again, to be fair to them, they have very efficient and effective processes, which mean you can get a taxi licence pretty quickly and far more quickly than if you came to us. However, what I would say is that, we do go above and beyond in using a vehicle checks, for example. I think you only need to have 1 vehicle check per year in Wolverhampton. In Doncaster, it's up to 3. We don't have an age policy, they don't have an age policy for vehicles, but again, we have those interim checks built in addition to the MOT. So I think we are quite rigorous, and I would say in that area we're more rigorous. Wolverhampton are quite robust in defending their position. But again, I think there are understandable concerns from the public, from politicians, and also from, you know, the taxi industry nationally.
Thank you, Kelly. Peter, I have a question for yourself. Your report details the actions that are outstanding from the recent audit. So what are your thoughts on regarding the overdue actions? Are you satisfied with the explanations provided? And are you concerned about them remaining outstanding for too long a period?
Thank you, Chair. Yes. When we carried out our audit, we had 3 key areas where we had concerns. The DBS issue, which Kelly's talked about, also the stop checks alongside the police. Those had lapsed as well due to COVID, and those got reinstigated. And then also the operator checks, those were put in place very, very quickly. Also, those were the key high-risk items. The 5 that we've still got outstanding, I'm comfortable with those. Those are a consequence of the service improvement that's been taken place, and it's obviously taken capacity away from the team. Some of them are dependent on the new IT system as well, so the delays are understandable, and I'm comfortable with the outstanding actions because the service is improving and it's addressing the root cause of the issues that we identified in the audit. So I'm comfortable with progress on them, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Now, Councillor Puff, you want to come back?
I've just got a couple more questions. You might want to write these down, actually. So just going back to the Wolverhampton thing, I think we may have inadvertently done a commercial for them, but do you see that perhaps more taxi drivers will perhaps go to Wolverhampton for their licensing, given what you just said, that it's quite fast and it's cheaper? My next question is just regarding the deferred actions that are in here, the 5 open actions. What is the risk potentially to us as a council, as a local authority, to residents and to taxi drivers by these actions not being complete and being deferred for this length of time? What is the impact of those actions being deferred, whether that be an impact on services or a financial impact or other risks?
Thank you. I think there's always going to be a risk that drivers will be attracted by cheaper fees to Wolverhampton. There's no doubt about that. And again, we would have potentially around an extra 100 drivers paying their fees into the council if 100 hadn't chose. I mean, you know, this is our ballpark figure. This is what we estimate. So, you know, that's a significant chunk of money that the council is missing out on. I think your second point, in terms of the 5 outstanding recommendations, I mean, they are due to be addressed within this financial year. Some of them are dependent on the new IT system. Some of them are dependent on, again, some changes linked to the rapid improvement plan. And again, there are some issues around policy, which we need to, again, take to licensing committee for members on that committee to determine. So, I mean, in terms of the impact on the trade, I think there is a minimal impact on them. The thing generally that the trade want to see is that, you know, fees are reasonable and processing times are reasonable as well. And I don't think either of these will necessarily impact on either of those determinants, really.
Just one more thing as well. I feel like, what was the detective called? Colombo, thank you. Just one more thing. Just in terms of the risks, I understand that some of these risks had been raised by individuals. I may have got this wrong. I understand that some individuals raised some of these risks early on before the audit. Was there an opportunity to address these earlier? And regardless of that, going forward, do we have a system in which people could raise these potential risks and we would pick up on them without having to do an audit?
I'm not sure there were risks raised necessarily, but I think again, you know, we need to absolutely face up to the fact that there was some dissatisfaction with the service from the local trade and also from members who were consequently being lobbied over things like processing times. You know, and that was an issue, and at times when we're busy because of the size of the team can remain an issue. So, you know, we're not over that hurdle yet. however we will be. So, yeah, I don't really think I have much more to add to that. I think, you know, I'm not aware of any risks per se that were flagged, but I was aware of, you know, significant times dissatisfaction with the service, particularly in those kind of months prior to COVID, when, you know, there'd been a backlog of applications generated just because of the way we were having to work, because everything slowed down. And again, to get a taxi licence, you need a medical certificate. You couldn't see your GP at one point. So there was all kinds of things which slowed down the processing. What I would say is that in Doncaster, the team did keep processing new applications. Other authorities just parked them. So I think, you know, the team again need a bit of a, you know, recognition for the fact that the service did keep continuing. It just, again, as I say, I'll use the same analogy, it kind of limped along, you know, to the dissatisfaction of the trade. However, you know, I know the authority that I came from had a backlog of around 300 applications the other side of COVID.
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to, and obviously I know the answer to this question, but I just think for a matter of record, and just so everybody in the room understands it. So just from a point of view of, if a taxi driver is licensed by Wolverhampton and drives in Doncaster, we cannot take any action against that taxi driver regardless of what they may do or may not do. I just think it's, obviously, you know, I know the answer to that, but I just think it's worth the point, just for a matter of public record, that you just, if you could just answer that for the rest of the committee.
That is correct, and for certain contraventions, you know, we fill in a form, we send it across, we email them. However, I just need to reassure members, for anything that is serious, any suggestion of serious criminality linked to a Wolverhampton taxi, we get straight on the phone to the unit over there. The SYP will already be involved. In fact, we've had some referrals from SYP who have wrongly assumed that drivers that they've arrested have been plated locally when they haven't. They've been plated in Wolverhampton, and those referrals have been made across. Again, to give Wolverhampton the dues, they were straight across and then revoked the licence within, I think, 48 hours. You know, so again, we have those checks in place, because absolutely, despite the fact that they might be plated in Wolverhampton, it's our residents that are compromised if we have a rogue taxi driver on our patch.
It is another layer, though, isn't it, that has to be gone through as quickly. I know you are mindful to be fair to Wolverhampton and now quickly to take action, and that's right. But it is another layer in the process that may see delays. I mean, my point being that if taxi drivers are licensed by the authority, regardless of who that is, that they operate in, then that layer doesn't exist anymore. And, you know, it should be a more streamlined process. That's my point, really.
Yeah, what I would say, Dave, is it's easier for us to doorstep a driver if we need to take a badge off somebody because they're unsafe than having to travel over, you know, 100 miles from Wolverhampton.
And just lastly, I'd just like to sorry, if you, I'm getting told off by the chair, but could I have some latitude, please, Chair?
Of course, sure.
Thank you. I just, when we found ourselves in this mess, obviously, you know, I have a reputation for not being easy on officers, and I've not been easy on you guys either. And I just wanted to thank you both and thank the officers within the department who have really pulled some trees up, put a lot of long shifts in, and got us into a position that we are now. I know there's still work to be done, but I think that it needs recognising. And as chair of licensing, you know, I'm pleased that I'm sat in audit listening to what is a much improved picture from what it was, you know, a couple of years ago. So I just want to say thank you. That's me done, Chair.
If I could just add on to that, Dave, to Kelly and Claire, I think this is a good news story in terms of the improvement that you're bringing about to the service. However, the Audit Committee always like to see things through to completion, so if colleagues agree, we would like to receive a further updating report. So if you can please liaise with the Head of Internal Audit, Peter, to agree timescales for the report to be presented to a future Audit Committee meeting.
Absolutely, Chair. I've already had an initial discussion with Claire on it. We're looking about this time next year to reporting any earlier. We'd still be reporting work in progress, so hopefully we're reporting job essentially done this time next year, Chair.
Chair, could I just also highlight Peter and team's support? We did uncover some, concerns within the service, and they've been a critical friend, didn't just highlight the problems and walk away. They've been supportive all the way through, and I think this is why we've been able to make the progress at the speed that we have done. So thank you to Peter and team for that.
Okay, I'll now read out the recommendations within the report. It is recommended that the committee consider and note the updated information provided. Is that moved and seconded? Thank you, and all agreed. The recommendations are noted. I will now move to item 7, CYPF, commissioning arrangements. As all members have read the report, I'll ask Lee Goals, the Assistant Director of CYPF, and Angela Harrington, Head of Service Quality and Safeguarding, if they wish to bring any specific issues to members' attention or have anything to add to the report since it was drafted. So we'll go over to Lee and Angela when they get seated. I hope you heard what I was saying there about us having read the report, and if there's anything you want to add to it. And if there is nothing you wish to add, or do you wish to tell us anything before we get...
No, Chair, I'm conscious that Angela's met with you beforehand, so and you've read the report, so we'll invite any questions.
Okay.
Please.
Yes.
Thanks very much for coming before us. Just to go over, it's what's page 24 on our briefing. It's just the table about the non-compliant contractual spend. I think I now understand this, but just for the benefit of the audit committee, if you could just explain to us what the non-compliant contract spend means in the column there, totaling 13 million, which is described as 50.25% of that amount.
Yes, so the non-compliant spend means that it's not compliant with our contract procedure rules. It doesn't mean that we don't have monitoring of that spend and a process to make that spend. But what it means is that the way they're not part of a framework means that it's not in line with our contract procedure rules. The 4 categories that we've taken are 4 main areas where we felt that it needed to be highlighted, and the work that we were doing around those, hence the reason why that is part of the overall contracted spend.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, colleagues. Do you want me to start again? No. Yes, right. Paragraph 29 sets out the arrangements that we have in place to document and approve the waivers arising from the non-compliant CPR contracts awarded, enabling CDC to discharge its statutory obligations. Now, this involves completing a quarterly waiver document detailing all contracts that haven't complied during that period. So it's one for Holly, really, that regarding these arrangements outlined in paragraph 29, what discussions and agreements have been held involving Scott Focus, who was the monitoring officer, and can you confirm that Scott has given his approval to these arrangements, which are different to what our normal practice is?
Yeah, we've spoken with Scott Focus, who's the monitoring officer, at length on this issue, and we've concluded that that was the best way for us to deal with it, to not take up a significant amount of officer time filling out form after form for that amount of spend. So Angela's team and my team will work together to monitor those non-compliant purchases on a quarterly basis. So as Councillor Farmer said earlier, you know, to see that the work that is being undertaken by Children's Commissioning to bring down those levels of non-compliant spend is going in the right direction, and then for us to at that point address any that isn't going in the right direction, so then we can see, you know, as we know, there's external factors at play, and things do take a long time to implement because it's quite strategic. So yes, in short, sorry, a long answer for a short, that could have been short, is Scott Focus is fully aware and supportive of that.
Yeah, I wouldn't have expected to hear anything different, Holly, but it's reassuring for the committee to know that. So, yes, Glenn.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question regarding our commissioning spend. So in terms of the overall spend, which seems to be about 75 million from what I can see in here, you did mention earlier on when we were doing the training that there were opportunities perhaps to reduce our spend. I'd be interested to know what those opportunities are, and also how does this, in terms of a percentage of our legal requirements and regulatory requirements to provide services, how much above and beyond are we going with that? So how much of that spend is meeting our regulatory requirements?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bluff. So to answer the first bit, we're doing lots to try and bring down the spend. I mean, predominantly they're around external out-of-area placements for children with complex needs around social care, and we've seen a significant reduction over the last year, both in numbers placed out of area and then the associated cost to that. And that remains a continued priority for the Directorate, because we know not only financially is it better, but the outcomes for children are a lot better if they are within Doncaster, and that is a real priority. What I would say is that this is a very challenging environment in which to do it. The average spend of an out-of-area placement has gone up by around about £120,000 a year over the last 2 years. So the fact that we've seen a reduction in out-of-authority spend and numbers against that backdrop, I think actually evidences the work that we're doing around this. That'll continue to be a focus. Can I just... What was the second question, sorry?
Yeah, sorry. In terms of the minimum requirements we have to provide as a council, sorry, Faye, you normally correct me on what the technical term is, but what in terms of providing the minimum service we have to provide, how much above and beyond that do we go? So what if we were to just go back to basics, what we legally have to do, how much would that be of our budget, if you know the answer to that?
I couldn't give you to the exact pound, but certainly in the context of this report, all the funding spent is linked to our statutory responsibilities. So for children, somewhere on the care ladder, either be fostering right through to an external residential placement.
They're quite frightening figures, really, aren't they? You know, when you kind of look at them, and they obviously, you know, it's the biggest part of the council budget, really. I just wondered, there seems to be a supply and demand issue, and there seems to be, as a result of that, a great deal of profiteering from providers. I know we've been, you know, forced down this route. Get too political, because obviously it's about audit and not politics, but we've been forced down this particular route. Is there going to, is there opportunity, you know, over a period of time to sort of turn the ship around to some extent and start bringing in more cost-effective provision provided by us and authority again, as opposed to being subject to market forces, which are basically hollowing out the service? Sorry, I probably did get a little bit political there, but I'm sure you will bring it back within your answer.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got an agreed strategy. Within our sufficiency strategy, the best way that we can control market forces is to keep children at home or as close to home as possible. So if they can't stay at home, then can we provide them under a special guardianship arrangement, from fostering right through to our local residential care homes. the more that we can do that, the less we're subject to market forces. With that in mind, we've got 2 new homes that we've bought over the last 18 months. We have an increase in our fostering capacity, and we've got a real push around our special guardianship arrangements, as we've seen with the reduction of those children placed out of area. There'll always be some children that need to be out of area, but the more that we can keep in, the less we are subject to that. In terms of the wider market forces and control, it's very difficult when it sits within the private sector for us to have a degree of more control on that.
So in short, you're having to do your job and become a market analyst as well.
Well, we continue to try and keep as many children at home as possible.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yes, John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just on that last point, what interests me is, yeah, we want to keep the children at home. Are there any mechanisms either within your department or the wider brief of, I'm thinking about Team Doncaster, basically, in terms of encouraging and assisting the training of people in our own borders, as it were, to do the job? I know we would be assisting the creation of a company, etc., but it seems to me that that's missing. If the market has got itself wrapped up nice and neatly, thank you very much, and keeps pushing up the prices, why aren't we, in terms of trying to assist the growth of the market within our own borders?
So I think there might be 2 elements to that. So in terms of our local workforce, we've got a really clear practice framework for our children that are for our services that are front facing, be that our family hubs right through to social workers, and that is around making sure that they are trained around trauma informed practice, but also that working around solution focused and relationships. And what that does is make sure that we've got a well equipped workforce to support families as early as we can to try and keep them at home. So that's the first bit, and that is a continued journey that we've got, and we are not alone within that, within England. In terms of the second part, we have a strategic relationship with a couple of providers, and within that we're able to negotiate better rates for our children and people, but also to ensure quality that we've got, and that is something that we continue to explore. But again, coming back to my earlier point, we also have our local estate around residential care homes. All of those care homes are graded good or above. So actually, the more that we can keep children within that, not only financially and economically it makes sense, but we can assure quality. Okay.
Thank you, colleagues. Having read the recommendations, which I'll move on to very shortly, we have the recommendation to update, for an update to be provided to Audit Committee in October 2024. I just wish to put on record the Audit Committee fully support this recommendation, and we look forward to noting progress in appointing more providers, as you just outlined earlier, onto the new and existing frameworks. So I will now read out the recommendations within the report. That the committee, 1, note the significant measures in place for placements commissioned packages that are recorded as not being compliant with contract procedure rules, and to provide details of the controls and mitigations that are in place and future work with the market to attempt to mitigate further non-compliant spend. 2, agree that CYPF Directorate, supported by the Head of Procurement, provide an update in October 2024 to the Audit Committee that details the current status of the spend on placements and work to date to improve and mitigate the existing issues. And 3, note work undertaken by the CYPF Directorate and Commissioning Team in conjunction with Strategic Procurement Team, SPT, to ensure compliance and delivery of services. Is that moved and seconded, colleagues? And is that agreed by all? Yeah, thank you very much. The recommendations are agreed. I will now move on to item 8, which is the internal audit report for the period October 2023 to December 2023. All members will have read the report, so I'm going to ask Peter Jackson, Head of Internal Audit, if he wishes to bring any specific issues to members' attention, or has anything to add to the report since it was drafted. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, this is my usual quarterly report. I don't think there's any significant updates to provide, Chair, so I'm quite happy to take any questions.
Glenn, straight in there.
Sorry, John. Yes, Peter, thanks very much for the report, and it is looking very positive, so always heading in the right direction, so that's always good. Just in terms of this control self-assessment, I do like a self-assessment. I think we've had this discussion before, so I am pleased to see that. But would it be possible for us to get visibility of some kind of dashboard of how the schools are performing? I'm assuming they're returning those self-assessments to audit, so would it be possible for the audit committee to see the results?
The assessments have all been returned. 2 have had to be returned back for some incomplete information, so we've had 29 in total. There will then be some analysis done of that. I will look at how we can share that with committee. I think it would have to be in some form of anonymised way, but I'd be quite happy in doing some sort of work with the committee to sort of give some idea, give some perspective of what the results of the risk assessments showing. As we've put in the narrative in the report, it's hopefully going to be able to us to target individual schools where they need some additional support, or pick up some sort of generic type issue that we've had when we put in the parent pay system a few years ago. We did a further piece of work to look at how well schools were using it and give them some sort of further advice over the control arrangements in place. So we're hoping it's going to be helpful in that respect.
Could I just add to that one, Peter? It's a different way of doing things, I guess, the self-assessment, but what, if anything, has been gained from it, from the exercise that you've carried out, and is it something you can take and use elsewhere?
All the returns have only been very recently received, so we're just at the process of analysing it, so it's unfair for me to sort of say one way or another. As expected, though, the schools that we have lesser concerns over their governance and financial arrangements were the quicker ones off the block, and there were some that had to be given a little bit of a nudge, but we have got them all in, which is a really positive outcome for us. It doesn't always work that well.
Purchase cards. So this is something I've been doing some analysis on for some time, because obviously the information's in the public domain. So I've been looking at the data myself, and I'm quite pleased to see that the Power BI is being used to do some analysis. So again, you know, I'm a fan of data analysis, so I'm quite keen to and pleased to see this. What I am interested in is, in terms of what you've done with purchase cards so far, have we identified any? I know there's 6k of savings in unclaimed VAT, but have we seen any breaches of potential policy here? And also, are we looking at where cards are being used in a regular way, perhaps moving them over to maybe going on to a contract service? Because there are some regular patterns I noticed in these purchase cards, especially things like Amazon spend and areas like that, where you start to wonder, why don't we have a contract in place for some of the spend that's in there?
Yeah, so it's early days with using the dashboard. The initial results have been very promising. We do intend to develop it further, and looking at the sort of outliers in terms of the spend that's been identified, it then does raise issues over, do we need to be looking at different ways of procuring? Those are being dealt with on a sort of item by item basis. We tried to pick up the easier or the more concerning looking items of spend initially as part of this exercise, and we are going to be continuing developing the dashboard and developing our methodology for using it. What it's not about is looking at the really minimal area of expenditure that goes through PCAD, but it does also give us a lot better insight as to how well managed and governed a particular area is as well, and it does give us a bit of insight as to whether there's a more detailed look required at that service outside of just purchase cards as well. But it also does give us the skills to be able to develop our data side of things using Power BI on a series of other financial systems, and that's something that we're currently working on, and I do intend to sort of give a bit of a wider update in my annual report to April's Audit Committee.
Thank you, Peter. Any other questions, colleagues? A couple from myself, Pete. I'll go through each section by section. Revision to the audit plan, section 1. I've noted your comments regarding the recruitment of temporary staff. Are you comfortable with the current situation, how it impacts on capability to deliver the internal audit service? And can I ask for your assurance on your ability to provide an annual opinion? Should we do these one at a time? It might be.
Thank you, Chair. So at the moment, in terms of the position that we're in within the team, we're hoping to be able to address one of the vacancies and make it permanent in the near future. I'm also have the team out to consultation on a range of proposals, and that should help strengthen our arrangements going forward. What I would give a bit of context is what a good position we're in as an audit team compared to other audit teams in the area. They're having to operate with some very limited resources. They've got recruitment freezes in place and so on, and they're going to have serious difficulties in being able to provide an internal audit opinion. I'm confident that I'll be able to provide on the basis of the work that we've done so far and the other sources of assurance that we use as usual to be able to give a positive opinion, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Section 2, audit work undertaken during the period, and the completed work is listed in Appendix 8 for us. Noted on paragraph 2.8, a limited assurance opinion over the Council's climate change governance arrangements 23-24. And item 2.10, the headline reasons. There are 14 agreed management actions identified, 4 of which have been implemented. So, can you summarise where we are regarding the remaining 10 actions? Are there any concerns over the delivery of these agreed actions? And given the limited assurance opinion, the Audit Committee would like to receive a further updating report. I would say yes.
Yeah.
So, Peter, can you arrange the timescales for a report to be presented to a future Audit Committee, please?
Okay, so with regard to the remaining 10 actions, Chair, we've got timescales agreed with all of them. I'm not aware of any concerns specifically over the progress of any of the actions. However, I am going to be setting up a meeting over the next couple of weeks to check progress. I am aware of an ongoing sickness situation, and that may have impacted on the progress that's been able to be made on those. We will have to go down our usual process of reviewing how realistic the originally agreed timescales are and revise as appropriate if we have got a problem in the delivery of those actions. But at the moment, I'm not aware of any specifically. As I say, all the actions have been agreed, including some that are the responsibility of the Chief Exec. So it has got that necessary line of sight at that level. And yeah, in terms of a future report update to Audit Committee, there will be the usual progress noted in my annual report. There's a number of high-risk items within high-risk actions within this particular audit report. So if they've become overdue, they will be naturally listed in the progress report. And I will also liaise with officers as to an appropriate timescale for a progress report to be brought to a future Audit Committee, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Section 3, the implementation of management actions arising from audit recommendations. We've noted there are no high-level overdue actions. The total number of medium and low-risk management actions remains low, although it's slightly increased. Revised implementation dates have been agreed, requiring for further extension of time. And as requested at the audit meeting in November, the report now allows us, if we can figure it out, how to identify how many of the overdue actions were overdue previously. And I think I've managed to work that, yeah. So we're happy with that, Peter. Are we all happy with that one? Yeah. Yeah. So I've only one question regarding this, Peter. Is that, do you have any concerns regarding this area?
Thank you, Chair. No, this is an area that is in a really good positive situation. You can see from the table that we've got 12 outstanding, which in relative terms going back historically is extremely low. There are 5 that have become overdue in adults' wellbeing and culture, and those were due to the departure more or less at the same time of the head of service and the service manager, and there simply hasn't been the capacity to implement those actions. Steps have been taken to revise implementation dates and get those implemented. The 7 that are overdue in place and that were overdue from the previous quarter, 5 of those relate to the taxi service that we've been talked about earlier. And the remaining 2 have got revised dates, and one of those is hopefully due for sign-off fairly imminently. So no, I regard this as a well-managed area, both sort of like a service level and from the sort of corporate monitoring that takes place as well, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Yes. Okay.
Thanks very much, Chair. Just to comment on the 4 school actions that are high. I know we generally do end up with a large number of actions when we do these investigations, but there appear to be 7 that continue to be overdue. I'm particularly interested in the one that is in School 2, the limited assurance one, and also the one that's in the investigation. Are you able to tell us any more about that, and what kind of impact does that have with these actions being overdue?
So the rating of these actions are specific to the school. So in terms of it being high at a school, it wouldn't register as being high within the authority, and because of that and the high number of actions that are generated, I don't include these in the mainstream table of actions. With regards to the implementation of these actions, we've recently received a lot of documentation from one of the schools to demonstrate the implementation of the action. So I'm hoping that there's going to be quite a significant number come down in that particular school. It's currently being checked as we're attending this meeting at the moment. The other one, I think I'm going to be raising it again with the head of service for school improvement and try and exert a little bit of pressure to get these actions over the line. They're quite long outstanding, and as you're rightly pointing out, one where we've had an investigation and fraud and whatever, you'd think that there'd be a bit more urgency in getting them put in place. I know that there have been specific issues around it because there's then been changes of staff and so on and so forth. But if I were a governor there, I'd be wanting to know that the actions from the investigation have been implemented.
Is it fair to say that there is that the risks are only perhaps related to financial risks? There's no safeguarding risks going forward with these?
Absolutely not. No safeguarding risk. They're all around the sort of financial and governance arrangements.
I'm going to move back to section 4, Peter, which I think is a key section of the report, the internal audit performance. And having read the report, the audit committee can take assurance of your confidence that the work plan for the rest of the financial year will be enough to give your opinion on the council's risk, governance and control arrangements. It's a comment more than a question, and if you wish to comment.
I guess I'm just reiterating my comment from earlier, Chair, that I'm confident I'll be able to give, as things stand, alongside the other sources of assurance at the moment, a clear, a positive, unqualified opinion, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. That's good to hear. I will now read out the recommendations within the report. The Audit Committee is asked to note 1. The position of the internal audit plan. 2. The internal audit work completed in the period. 3. The position with regards to implementation of management actions arising from internal audit recommendations. And 4. The current position regarding the ability to deliver the annual opinion over the Council's risk, governance and control arrangements. Is that moved and seconded, colleagues? Thank you. And it all agreed by all. The recommendations are agreed. Item 9, Grant Thornton, Auditor's Annual Report 2022-23. All members will have read the report, so can I ask Gareth Mills and Perminda Setti of Grant Thornton if they wish to bring any specific issues to members' attention or have anything to add to the report since it was drafted. Gareth, Perminda?
I'll just briefly introduce these papers, Chair, before handing over to Perminda to pull out one or two of the key messages, particularly in the VFM report. I think for me, I think it's just emphasising, I guess, what we touched on at the training session last week, Chair, that the accounts audit was concluded pre-Christmas as planned, and we include the ICE 260 just for information as the next item on the agenda. And the VFM work was concluded very early on in January, as we plan to do, Chair. And again, thanks to relevant colleagues at the council, Debbie, Faye, Pete, etc., that fed into that VFM piece of work. So essentially, the 22-23 external audit work, Chair, was concluded, both accounts and VFM, in early January. I will be issuing my audit certificate at the end of this meeting, Chair. We'll send that through to Faye, and that formally concludes the 22-23 external audit work at Doncaster. And I think just putting that in the context of some of the challenges nationally, Chair, to have a large metropolitan single-tier council with all its 22-23 external audit-related actions all complete and done as of today's date, that's a really good achievement and outcome for the council, particularly when you've got nearly 1,000 audits that are still outstanding across the country, and all the national issues that we did touch on at the workshop last week. So I just wanted to make that into the that sort of overarching context, Chair, and Perminda will just draw out one or two of the key messages in the VFM report now. Thank you.
Thanks, Gareth. You have in front of you our findings from our value for money work, which we've undertaken for 2022-23. On page 3 or 55 of the pack, the exec summary really sets out, I suppose, the key points I just wanted to touch on. We obviously are required to look at the arrangements that you have in place to secure economy, efficiency and effectiveness, and we're required to look at those arrangements in 3 specified areas, which are financial sustainability, governance and improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. In 22-23, we've raised one key recommendation relating to the Council's dedicated schools grant, and that's an escalation of an improvement recommendation we made last year, and I'll come on to the reasons for that in a moment. We've also raised 2 further improvement recommendations, and there were no recommendations relating to governance or improving economy, efficiency and effectiveness. So those 3 recommendations, the 2 improvement recommendations and the 1 key recommendation, fall within financial sustainability. For comparison, we've also set out there what happened last year. Last year we raised just 2 improvement recommendations within financial sustainability. The actual key recommendation is actually set out on page 7 or page 59 of the pack, and it really talks about the Council taking actions to control and reduce the DSG deficit, which is continuing to grow, and the reason for that is increasing demand, increasing costs, and whilst you are taking a range of actions, those have not been sufficient to bring that down. Further details are set out on page 16 or 68 of the pack. There's a bar chart there that just shows the increasing dedicated schools grant deficit. I think it's worthy of note that the council didn't experience significant cost increases earlier on as a number of other authorities had. And those authorities did receive safety valve funding earlier on, which Doncaster obviously did not, given the increasing DSG deficit wasn't significant. But there is now quite an increasing level of costs that the council is facing, and by the end of 26-27, at the moment the council is projecting that the DSG deficit will be approaching over £38 million, which is a significant amount of money. At the moment also that there is an exemption in terms of the deficit doesn't count towards the council's general fund balances, but that is due to end in April 2026. And at that time, if that exemption is not extended, those costs will actually fall on general fund balances, which at the moment appear to be insufficient unless you take balances out of earmarked reserves and bring them in to offset these costs. We are aware that the council's officers are in dialogue with government and are in discussions also through SIPFA and another private sector company which are working with the Department for Education to try and improve and manage the position to try and help bring that down. The other improvement recommendations that we made are set out on pages 18 and 19 or page 70 and 71 of the reports pack, and they relate to firstly updating Cabinet in a public paper where routine financial reports are not presented, and we particularly noted the medium-term financial strategy, which routinely was updated in October, didn't actually happen, and there are reasons for that which are set out in management's comments there. And then over the page, the other recommendation relates to identifying saving schemes in advance of need. The council delivered, I think, around 72% of savings target during 2022-23, and what we're suggesting is that you try and identify saving schemes that you can actually implement at short notice should they be needed, such that you try and deliver the total savings that you've set out in your budget. Management recommendations have been set out for both of those areas and have been taken on board. A couple of other things I just want to draw to your attention on page 22 of the report or page 74 of the pack. The Ofsted inspection that happened a couple of years ago, good progress has been made by the council in implementing the actions that you identified from that. And I think the key point to note is on sort of the right-hand side of the slide. As part of the council's Transformation and Improvement Board meeting, you have an improvement advisor, who is appointed by the DFE. The improvement advisor now feels that, given the continued action that you are taking, that the council no longer needs the involvement of an improvement advisor going forward. That's a really good outcome for the council and indicates the positive progress that you have made. Over the page, onto page 23 or page 75 of the pack, I just want to draw attention to Doncaster Sheffield Airport. The council has taken a lot of action to try and facilitate the airport reopening and is in ongoing discussions with the owners and others to try and make that happen. Obviously, a lot of that is confidential and therefore very limited in terms of what we can say. I think it's just important to note that nothing has been signed as at the date of our report that we are aware of, and we will continue to monitor the progress around that and the governance arrangements that the council has in place. I've got nothing further to add on the auditor's annual report, but I'll pause there and take any questions with Gareth.
Thank you, Praminda. Do you remember wish to speak on these items, Glenn?
Thanks, Praminda. DSG, face smiling. So I do know, thank you very much for the report and for the projection, and obviously I'm pleased that we've managed the DSG relatively well compared to some of the other local authorities, and it's pleasing to see that. I am just having a look at the graph that you've got on page, in our pack it's page 68, I think it was page 16 of your report. Now I do take the fact that in the management response to the action, we've said that we will take action to try and reduce our spend on DSG and the deficit. But I do note that there's a reduction, the projected reduction between year 23-24 and 24-25, and then it starts to go up. How does that correlate to the fact that we want to try and reduce the deficit, the in-year deficit, when the graph is then projected to go up?
I think that might be one question that I don't know whether Faye wants to pick that one up. I think the information that we've collated is based on, I think, publicly available information that's been reported to members. And I think the other thing to add is it is a projection, so there may well be further actions that the council is proposing to take which will help bring it down, but of course those actions may not be sufficient.
Yeah, I think we're continuing to review the position. What I'd say is in terms of the dedicated schools grant, what the recent information, I'll have a quick look at that chart compared to, you know, the latest information. But in terms of what we reported at Q3, it is going down. However, well, it is projected to go down. I think, sorry, 22-23. Let me just have a look at the chart.
Cumulative and projections.
Yeah.
We saw, yeah, one's basically just in year. So our plan is to make impact in relation to that. So that's why you're seeing that trend going down. But the cumulative position, yeah, but the cumulative position, because we've still got, it's somewhat different from ordinary revenue I&E accounts, because we've got a deficit. So even though we've got a deficit recurring, that's piling on to top onto the previous year. So even if it's going down, you can still have a increase in position.
I get the question. I will take it away because, as you say, it was, you're looking at the line, aren't you? Yes. Yeah. So in terms of the DSG deficit in year, as you say, the actual in 22-23 was just over 6 million. 23-24, we were projecting about a 6 million overspend. That has worsened, I must say, since we kind of produced this. We are kind of, like I say, we're updating each time, but that's kind of worsened, and then we're expecting it to go down. So it might be a kind of timing, but yeah. In terms of that trajectory, with the work that we are doing with the delivering better value, we've identified about 2 million savings for the future. So it is the latest plan is it does go down. However, it is still significant in year.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify my question. So, and I think Faye, you've pointed it out. So 22-23, it was about just over 6. Then it comes down a little bit for 23-24. And then it comes down quite a lot for 24-25, which would suggest that you're going to do quite a lot. And then the rate of increases post 24-25. So I agree, there will always be a little bit of an increase, even if it's just for inflation. But it's the rate of increase that I was looking at. So I think that's understood.
Yeah, I think what I'm saying is the 24-25 has been updated potentially since this. So it's more now with that kind of graph. We can work through it with.
It's basically £1 million quid, that's what you're saying, isn't it? You've gone from 24 to 26, 27. The in-year increase goes from 4 to 6. And I think that'll be to do with demographics, because if you look at the number of children we're supporting based on our growth. So I think we had, I'm trying to remember if it was just over 1,000 that had health and social care assessments, and now we've got 2.5. So I think that'll be to do with the fact that there's still, based on what's coming through and based on what's happened in the past, unless there's a change in terms of the framework of which the assessments occur, there will be an increase.
Yeah, and so my back of the fag packet estimate from the data I looked at, it looks like we would need to decrease by about 18% a year in order just to stand still, which is huge.
I've said in every forum I come into, based on the current environment that we're operating into, so you touched on that in terms of that question about statutory and non-statutory, based on the requirements that we have to support children, because I think there was another question earlier on about supporting children at home. We don't entirely support them at home. We support them in homely environments because fundamentally they're all children that have been protected under Children's Acts. These children have been assessed under Education Acts for health and social care plans. So the interventions that we're having based on the legislative requirements that we have to operate within are driving us to this position. Again, it was on the national news this morning. Unless government changed the legislative requirements, regulatory requirements that we operate in, we are going to experience this circumstance. And there is no solution with this. The expectation from families, they know what the rules are now. It took some time to warm up to it when the government changed from statements to health and social care plans. But now that they know what a bit like adult services, you've got to go through a process in order to access care. You've got to go through a process to access additional support in an educational environment. And they are pressing us on that point. And so until the rules are changed, we're going to be in this situation.
Just to pick up on that point, until the rules are changed, I don't think the rules need changing. I think government need to fund its policies. You know, ultimately that's the problem. You know, we shouldn't be racing. And I understand where you're coming from a financial point of view, but we shouldn't be racing to the bottom of the provision that's made for vulnerable children and families in any borough, let alone Doncaster. So I find it. What worries me about it is that there like you say, there are actually only two solutions for this. Either standards are dropped by government, or government make more money available. We don't have a way of getting out of this, because I noticed in the summary of the report, you know, Grant Thornton are happy with our cost effectiveness, our governance. We are doing pretty much everything we can do as a local authority. So, you know, there is no question mark over our management whatsoever. It's not this idea that many would push, that this grand scale of waste within local authorities. So what's the situation? Because even if we control the day-to-day spending, we can't reduce the deficit, can we? Because the deficit just sits there. Is that correct? Sorry, you come in at that.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Councillor Shaw. You know that when we started the existing external audit contract 5 years ago, there were 3 local authorities that Grant Thornton audited nationally that were in a material deficit position on DSG, just 3 across the country. Now it's almost the norm amongst sort of single tier metropolitan councils. So, you know, there's been a significant deterioration in the financial position of these DSG accounts, if you like, across the country over the last 5 years. And that's one of the reasons why this statutory override is currently in place, to prevent that deficit hitting, in inverted commas, the bottom line. Now, you know, as Perminda rightly says, that statutory override is due to cease in 26-27. But unless, you know, the statutory requirements change or the funding changes, that's going to be a huge impact as things stand for Doncaster and a huge number of other authorities out there. So, you know, whichever government is in power at that stage, are they likely to stick to that deadline, or will that deadline and the difficult decisions be pushed down the road and it be extended further? And given that it's not, you're not on your own on this, there's a huge number of authorities impacted by it, you would think it may be pushed back. But, as we discussed on the training session last week, it's still there, and ultimately it's got to be covered at some point by someone out there, because it is such a significant deficit nationally.
Yeah, and I mean, if I understand it right, I mean, that deficit's there. That doesn't take any account of our spend next year and the year after, does it? So that's, they have to give us the money, find another way of writing it off, or do I understand that correctly?
You're right. I mean, those authorities that I deal with that were in a worse position than Doncaster earlier on this, that have managed to get safety valve funding. That safety valve funding is linked to those authorities signing up to a deficit reduction plan and, in theory, sticking to that plan. Otherwise, the year-on-year safety valve funding is not necessarily guaranteed. So they've got to play their side of the bargain, if you like, for the receipt of the safety valve information. Whereas Doncaster, obviously, you're currently you're not part of that safety valve funding. You are in discussions, as we said, with DFE around that. So your position, as it's set out on that graph, subject to any updates that Faye may give, does show that deficit position worsening over the next 3 or 4 years.
If I could just ask another question then. So the safety valve funding is obviously a sign up to reduce the year-on-year deficit, the growing deficit, for want of a better description, if I understand it rightly. Is that actually practical for authorities to deliver, or is it just pie in the sky? I mean, basically anybody who signed up to that safety valve mechanism, are they managing to reduce their deficit sufficiently to allow them to tap into the kind of writing off the overall accumulated deficit?
I mean, that is the theory of the safety valve programme, to reduce the in-year position and ultimately clear the deficit at the end of that safety valve funding programme. Some authorities are managing that, others are finding it more difficult for all the reasons that Debbie's just given around, the number of children being impacted by this stuff is increasing. The demographics is challenging across the country, and that's why I say that even those in receipt of safety valve funding, there is a risk to those authorities that if they're not delivering on their side of the bargain, the continued safety valve funding is not guaranteed if they don't deliver on their part of the plan.
And last question. So those that are managing to reduce the in-year deficit, are they managing to deliver their statutory duties and responsibilities to the cohort, or into, and I know you can maybe only be anecdotally, are we seeing slippage within those authorities where they're being audited and found to start to be lacking in what they do? I'm sure you understand what I'm driving at. Are they still managing to maintain the level of statutory services that they're required to do while reducing this deficit, or are we seeing them slip in terms of audit and kind of red flags be raised?
I think it'd only be sort of gut feel and anecdotal evidence, but I think the importance of keeping children safe is an overarching factor in those local authorities that have been in receipt of safety valve funding, and in essence, I suppose that it almost, the importance of keeping children safe to an extent will trump the financial obligations, if you like, because of the importance of that particular field for a lot of members. It's one of the most important things that you probably keep you all awake at night is the safety of children in your particular borough. So my view is that even those that are in receipt of it are still finding it difficult to utilise that safety valve funding to bring down in-year deficits and the overall deficit, because of the importance attached to you know, statutory provision of vulnerable children.
I'm aware that both Debbie and Faye wish to come in on this particular point.
I was just going to explain the chart because, as you say, it's based on Q2 information that's been provided, and as you say, it kind of, in terms of that shape, 24-25 assumes savings are going to be delivered of 2 million as part of the Delivering Better Value programme, and then, as you say, it then goes up because the savings assumed remain at the 2 million, but that in-year position takes into account the increase in numbers of projected out of authority, etc. So it's as we kind of explained, really. We are since updating that and looking at those assumptions and looking at that kind of 2 million in terms of the savings expected, but also reviewing the projections for future pressures. Potentially it is worsening as well. So as we say, in terms of managing those pressures, the demand is expected to increase. So that's just to explain in terms of that.
In other meetings, I've made this point as well, because this isn't an isolated bubble in terms of DSG. It impacts on the council's general fund because we're funding this deficit cash flow wise, and its impacts on our ability. So we manage, as you know, through probably other meetings, we manage our money really carefully in order to reduce the need to borrow for capital purposes. But if we're utilising the funds in order to make good a recurrent deficit, then that means that we've got less cash out for elsewhere, and it also reduces our ability from a risk management point of view should there be unforeseen matters as well, because that's in part the recommendation about ensuring that if the safety valve, which PSI don't believe will come off, but PSI don't want it to continue either because of the fact that it's impacting on our overall organisational's sort of financial resilience. So we look at it in through one lens, but it needs to be considered in terms of the wider council resilience. Hence the reason why it's a sort of a recommendation here, and why I keep banging on about it in most meetings, because it's the biggest risk that we're facing at the moment.
Thanks very much, Debbie. Just in terms of the management comments on page 60, which Perminder, I think is page 8 of your report. The management comment on there is that through general reserves, though general reserves are insufficient to meet the deficit, we are confident that the DSG deficit override, if it is removed, that it could be managed using a combination of general reserves and earmarked reserves. When I first heard this some time ago, I thought, that's going to pay it off. But of course, it would then accumulate the next year again. So given the fact that this is a bit of a ticking time bomb, do we have any indication of when that would explode in terms of it being a material impact on us?
It's material now. I mean, in terms of the reason why there was that conversation and that comment that was incorporated, it was from a risk management point of view. If the statutory override came off, everything would go, everything we've got.
That's all the general reserves, uncommitted general reserves, and some of the larger earmarked reserves. But yeah, pretty much that's our resilience gone.
And our ability to transform and do anything else. That's how serious it is. So it's serious now, but that's why I don't believe the government will take the statutory override out, because it's so significant. But and that's another reason. I just don't understand why it's not the biggest issue that government are talking about, because at the moment it's a bit like PFI in the past. It's hidden and it's not really well understood, but it's wrong.
I was just, sorry, I can't resist but being political when you've got the only Tory MP that we've got in this authority that's busy editing videos of me in full council rather than lobbying his own government to tackle serious matters like this, then it's hardly surprising. Sorry, Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, it is massive, isn't it? But if we trigger the safety valve, what impact is that going to have? Because again, like you say, it's going to increase year on year. What, is there going to be an improvement?
I can answer that. We're one of 55 that are on the delivering better value, and we're one of the lower deficits. So we're quite far away from being on the safety valve. Hence why, you know, from a national perspective, this is just massive. You know, it's. Well, it needs to get out. And I do welcome flagging it as part of the value for money report, because it is, and the more we do this, then it's kind of raising that recognition as well, because it is there, it's published, it's part of our accounts, it's, you know, it's a balance. So it is shown, but I think the more we can do to kind of highlight and like I said, the work we're doing through the Delivering Better Value and kind of working with Newtons and SIPFA and the DFE in terms of, you know, highlighting the position, the better.
No, sorry. No, thank you for that. And because it is massive, it needs to go out there. Because like I weren't aware how dangerous this was till this, you know, till the training, and it was highlighted in this report. So yeah, it definitely needs to be out there. My other question is, well, it's not a question, it's observation, because it undermines all DMBC's, CDC's hard work, doesn't it? You know what I mean? All the strides we're making, all the positives. We've had good meetings today where we've made positive strides with other departments, and the finance department's making great strides, but this definitely undermines everything what you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, I'm going to comment on this, but before, I don't want to lose the important aspect that this is a really positive report in the current economic climate. Given the funding challenges that local governments are facing and the dire position that some of the local authorities find themselves in, reportedly find themselves in, we're in a very, very good position. Hence, it's a very good report. But I'm struggling with this as colleagues are, and I guess you are as well, because on the key recommendation, the council should take action to control and reduce DSG deficit 2023 and beyond to eliminate the deficit. And then in our response, we state that what we will do, but that's probably on a, like Glenn was saying, it's just like probably on a year. But what I want to know is, are we saying then there are no more actions that we can take as an authority to reduce this deficit? We've got no other initiatives in place that can bring forward?
I think what we're saying is we're working as part of the Delivering Better Value programme. We've identified savings through that, but still there's an in-year deficit. So working through that programme in terms of looking at what others are doing and looking at what the opportunities are, there remains a deficit. So we've not been able to identify sufficient savings through that programme to balance that position. Whether you can say ever is the more you can do, but that's the position.
Well, some authorities which are in much worse position are having discussions with parents which is around affordability, and I guess it's picking up on my thread about the changing the rules and forms of engagement. Do take the point about sufficient funding, but given that there doesn't seem to be any additional funding coming, we just cannot sustain this position. So ultimately, we will be into the point where we are more getting into rationing and those discussions. So the initiatives people are looking at is more classroom-based support as opposed to, so it's more intensive and local. So in the way that Lee talked about earlier about the sufficiency strategy and about providing support, more accommodation related for children looked after, but this is about children in schools, about trying to find local, those more school classroom-based provision in order to provide that support. And they are looking at creative ways to do that, working alongside schools, but I think ultimately will come down to expectation management unless there's shed loads of funding.
Thanks
very much. Just in terms of delivering better value programme, I am aware, I mentioned earlier, I've spoken to some other local authorities who have different ways of tackling this, and they have been able to make reductions, which they say is based around a holistic approach to outcomes. But if we can't make these reductions in what we're spending, and the government doesn't continue to keep this cap on there and stop it going from the reserves, what's the other alternative other than reducing the service? Would ultimately that just have to result in a raise in council tax?
This is a separate ring fence fund, which is basically, it's got a separate arrangement, so it's completely shielded from the council tax. It's got to wash its own face.
That's linked to the override, you know, because it's a ring fence budget. The override is kind of saying you've got to ring fence, you've got to carry forward that overspend, etc.
I just wondered, but at what point do we fail to hit the threshold for our statutory delivery if we start rationing services? Because there's no provision to ration services. If a child is demonstrating a need through the assessment process, then they're demonstrating a need, aren't they? And the thing is as well is then if within the education service they're not coping with them through an inclusion kind of policy and they're unable to keep them in school, there's the unofficial and off-rolling and permanent and non-permanent exclusions are going through the roof anyway. And we are picking up other substantial costs to try and manage that in other areas. So I understand we've got to do something about it, but it seems impossible to do anything about it. I know that sounds defeatist, but it looks like it's an impossible task without some government relenting somewhere along the line. I just can't see how we can ration a service that is a statutory service that children will be acknowledged as requiring.
I suppose because it's not as black and white as they're not homogeneous blocks of activity. So like big picture learning, as for example, that's a different way of providing more intensive short-term support for children who have specific support needs for a short period of time, and that's a local provision. It's a cost-effective approach. It might be that we need more of that, but overall we'll need or some other solution. In part, we've got some really costly out of authority placements, and if you can, in the same way that I'm talking about the future placement strategy, which Lee again referenced, where we've got high cost out of area versus more personalised local provision, it's about breaking that cycle, but overall we'll still have to live within the resources we've got available.
Just come back on that. I spent 12 years in alternative provision, education alternative provision. There aren't the providers out there because there's not the money in it, because ultimately, if statutory service providers can't provide it, the private sector can't provide it, because they're seeing the same downward pressures on what we can afford to pay. We're seeing it right across the sector. We're seeing it in care homes. You know, it doesn't matter. It does matter, in my personal view, who provides, but it's irrelevant if the budgets are constantly being restricted and pushed down. You know, so in Doncaster, there's very little growth, if not a negative growth, in terms of alternative provision outside of mainstream education. I know at least 2 or 3 organisations that delivered in Doncaster for, you know, over the last sort of 10, 15 years that no longer exist, and the others are struggling. So I think you know, we need to get our heads around that private provision is not going to come, you know, riding over the hill as a rescuer, because it's just not going to happen, because no one can afford to provide what is needed on the budgets that are going to become available.
I was just going to provide some further detail in terms of one of the lines in terms of spending the dedicated schools grant. So pupils educated out of area for SEN, we spent just over 7 million in 21-22. We projected to spend 12 million in 23-24, and that just shows that scale of increase demand, but also the increased cost. So I suppose it's like supporting as well the conversation that we've had. 12 million in 23-24, 12.
But I think that demonstrates, doesn't it, you know, the point. So we've got into the same situation here as we've got within looked after children, and yeah, basically the provision shrunk, and what we're left with are profiteering. And you know, whether we can encourage a renaissance among our alternative providers is another matter. But the market went that way as a result of market forces. And it then shrinks to such an extent that the ones that are left are then profiteering. None of those providers would be particularly keen to open up in Doncaster when they can make as much profit from the. You know, this is the ultimate issue with this sort of type of market, isn't it? I don't see a way out of it other than government, but you know, turning on the tap. But I know that you will do. This is not criticism of any of our officers, you know, in these circumstances. It's just I think however we slice it, we're not going to get out of this mess.
Putting the recurrent deficit to one side at the moment, because I do appreciate that's a big scary figure, and the only way to manage that is by a chunk of money coming from central government or us using our reserves. That's it. In terms of recurrent, I think the reason why Faye highlighted that big chunk of money that's out of authority, because if you can, in terms of strategies, if you can reconfigure that resource, which is an awful lot of money, in terms of more local provision with schools, I know that this is a transformation that's really challenging, but Children's Services have done that. Our future placement strategy, it was approved 5 years ago, has borne fruit. We've gone from 39 places, it's 52. 52 to 29 out of authority. And as a result of that, our children's placements, that's why we're bucking the trend in terms of from a general fund perspective. Notwithstanding, we've put lots of money into Children's Services in terms of the road we've had over the last 5 years, and I don't want to spend the next half an hour describing that journey that we've been on with Children's Services. But we have got to a place where we're turning the tanker really in terms of where the money's spent and the sustainability of it. And the same is true of this, because if you look at the capital programme, which will be in your budget report in 4 weeks' time, less than 4 weeks' time now, there's investment in schools, in provision, in order to provide like a little bit of a hub and spoke to the school, to provide that, dare I use the word, safety valve to the school where there is challenging behaviour from children, and I don't think the solution is necessarily going to be in alternative provision, because as you rightly said, the range of provision in the market has shrunk, and the ones that are left are actually, well, it's on national record how much profit they're making. The solution needs to be in working with schools and reconfiguring that resource in a way.
Hey Debbie, it's beyond our scope, but it's very frustrating in that, we had this system. This is how things used to be. It was very well funded. I ran a significant alternative provision internally within a large comprehensive school in this area, and there was a budget there. And we went from nothing as a budget up to a substantial budget, and overall that strategy was very, very successful. Unfortunately, we've kind of within a period of 10 years that's been completely decimated and dismantled. So we kind of and all that expertise has been lost, and so we're starting from ground zero again. And the unfortunate thing about starting from ground zero, you're looking at, I would say it took a good 5 to 6 years for us to get to the point where you're scrapping around from money to the point where you have a serious budget where you can actually do something with. So I think that we need to be mindful of that this is a trajectory that we can't hit straight away, and it's going to take us 5 or 6 years to see any meaningful kind of reduction and get that system up and running and to see the impact of that. But it's just so frustrating because we had it all, but cuts have meant that school budgets have cut, they've seen, well, there's so many things, but anyway, okay.
Colleagues, we've spent quite a bit of time on that, quite rightly as well, but I will now read out the recommendations within the report. The Audit Committee is asked to note Grant Thornton's annual report on Doncaster Council for 2022-23. So is that moved and seconded, colleagues? And agreed, and agreed by all. The recommendation is noted. I'll now move on to item 10, the Grant Thornton Audit Findings, ISA 260 report, 2022-23, the final version. The report is for information only, as you will have noted from your papers. As all members will have read the report now, I'll ask Gareth Mills and Paminda Sethi of Grant Thornton if they wish to bring any specific issues to members' attention, or if they have anything to add since the report was drafted. Over to you, Gareth and Paminda.
Thank you, Chair. This report originally was presented to the November Audit Committee, relates to the final account, so I'm not proposing to go through it. It's there just for information. As a final report, there were 2 additional amendments that I raised at the Audit Committee in November, which weren't contained in the report at that time, which have now been incorporated into this report within Appendix D, adjusted and unadjusted amendments. So it's just for information, nothing further to add.
Thank you, Paminda. Anyone wish to comment on this? No. Okay, so I'll read out the recommendations within the report. The Audit Committee is asked to note Grant Thornton's audit findings, ISA 260 report 2022-23. So is it moved and seconded, colleagues? And all agreed? Agreed. The recommendation is noted. Before I just close today's meeting, I just wanted to add a comment, because I know we've had a long debate on these last 2 items, but I think it should be noted that the City of Doncaster Council are in a very positive position, having our audit completed, compared with too many other local authorities who I'm sure would be delighted to be in our position. This reflects well on both teams involved, both at the City of Doncaster Council at Grant Thornton, who've worked extremely hard to deliver this outcome. So on behalf of the Audit Committee, I'd like to thank both teams, and if you could take that back to the team members. Thank you. And let me move back to my script. We used to manage years ago with no scripts, but I've come to remind me of what we should be doing and when. So that concludes the items of business on today's agenda, colleagues. Thank you to everyone for their attendance. I'm now going to declare the meeting closed. Thank you once again.